Hello class, Dr. Wilt here, and we're going to continue now with our talk about motivation. Last week we talked about motivation. We started off talking about morale, that HR magazine, the 20 best morale boosters, and we went a little bit into motivations. And if you remember, I finished off by talking about Eric Berne and transactional analysis, but in the process, I showed you some motivational posters, and then I think I actually showed you a couple of what we call demotivational posters. Now, those motivational posters, very common back in the 1990s, early 2000. Almost every corporate and organization would have them on the walls, in the break room, down the halls, every place. But what we found is that the demotivational posters, which come from a company called Despair.com, actually were a better motivation than the motivational posters. And the reason why is, if you remember, and you'll see here in a moment, is that they have a tendency to explain to people what it means to break out of the mold and to be different. And that quite often is the biggest motivation out there, is to be different, to be something that people will recognize as being special. So as we go forward here, I'm going to show you a few more of the demotivational posters, some that have been very, very popular that I've actually used myself in my organization. And the first one is probably my favorite one, called Tradition. It says down here, just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it's not incredibly stupid. And of course, this is a picture of running with the bulls, not the smartest thing in the world. But this is very, very true. And the reason why I've used it, and so many people have used it, is because we're stuck in this mentality that however we've done things in the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years is the best way to do it. And you know, coming from a environment like the academic environment, going into the corporate world, that things actually do improve over time, and you're coming in with better ideas. And the first thing that's going to happen to you is that you'll bump into someone who says, but that's not the way we do it. And you're going to think to yourself, there's a much better way to do it if they just listen to me. So this is a very, very popular poster that was used to try to explain to people is pay attention to those new graduates, pay attention to people who are coming in with new ideas, because quite often it's a much better way to do things. The next one that's been very popular, I just like the graphics on this one too, is called Ambition. The journey of 1,000 miles sometimes ends up very, very badly. And the reason why I use this one is because, as you know, I had an ad agency, and we would spend hours and days and sometimes weeks designing different marketing plans and branding images just to take it to the customer. And the customer said, I don't like it. Bring me something else. And I remember several times telling the different marketing group that was putting these things together is that, you know, the customer is right because they're buying it. They're paying for it. They may not like what you're doing, but they're right. And I would have the team to come back to me and say, but I've spent so much time, we spent countless hours coming up with, can't you convince them that this is the best campaign? I'm kind of like, no, I am sorry. If they don't like it, it doesn't matter how long you spent, is just not going to fly. Go back and create a couple other campaigns and let's see if they work. Some of the other ones, teamwork. A few harmless flakes of working together can unleash an avalanche of destruction. The reason why I like to bring this one up is that I've not used this one too often, but I've known some people who have used it. They said that teamwork, unfortunately, if you get the wrong people on the team, everything falls apart. You know, it creates this avalanche of destruction. And the best example is that teams have to be functional. They cannot be dysfunctional. They have to work together. The worst thing that can happen on a team is you have 1, 2, or 3 people trying to determine who's the most powerful, who's going to lead the team, who is going to vie to be the manager of the team in the process. And that competition among those 2 or 3 people can actually just create a very dysfunctional, disruptive team. The next one is kind of cute. It's a starfish on the beach, but self-esteem. Just because you think you're the star doesn't mean that you're going anywhere. And this kind of relates back over to all those things we looked at from HR Magazine about ways to build morale, to get people to think that, you know, that their way is the best way. And really, when it comes right down to it, if you think you're the star, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go anywhere. And I want to kind of step back a moment to remember not so much the current culture of the Gen Z, it's the Gen Y that always got awards for participation, just for showing up. I know many times both my boys got awards for being on different types of basketball, softball teams, or whatever it was. And they didn't get it for winning, they got it for participation. And those awards sit there on the shelf in their room, and they're just kind of like, that's the most dumb award in the world because I didn't do anything to get it. They just felt like they had to give it to us to keep our self-esteem up. Well, folks, self-esteem builds when you actually do something that you can feel good about, not when someone just kind of gives you something. So that's kind of what this poster is about. Not that this is probably the one I've ever put in my offices before. But at the same time, this is one I have used called recognition. Having your moment in the sun isn't always a good thing. I love it. Snowmen melting in the sun. Let me tell you why this has been so popular with many companies. It's because some people feel like that they have to be recognized for every accomplishment they've done. Okay, that's great. Super. I'm happy for them. But the problem is that means every time they do something has to be better than the time before. That becomes very stressful, that you're always having to outdo not someone else, but you're having to outdo yourself and yourself again and yourself again. And I've told people before sometimes is, you know what? Pull yourself out of the limelight. Let someone else do something. Let them get the recognition. You can get your recognition another time, but don't feel like that it's always about you being recognized. Now, the next one is very interesting. This one is what we call worth. Just because you're necessary doesn't mean you're important. Now, this is interesting, and the reason why is you have to think about what's going on right now and what's been going on with this whole concept of COVID in the past. Because what's happened is that we have seen people who actually were very important one day, and they've been doing that job for 5, 10, 15 years, and the next day they're laid off. And they're told, I'm sorry, we don't need you anymore. Yeah, I know you were important, but you're not important anymore. You were necessary before, but now you're not really important. And you sit there and say, well, that's just terrible. And actually, in some ways, it kind of is, because people who have worked for many, many years and they've done the same job, their job is now going away, being replaced. I'm going to give you the example. The Bureau of Labor Standards came out back in 2019. It said, the fastest growing job in the U.S. was in fast food restaurants, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and all that. And they said between 2019 and 2029, 10 years, that position is going to explode. And there's going to be so many people into it. You know what? COVID came around here in the beginning of 2020, and all of a sudden everything started to change. I was doing a webinar here about a week ago with a good friend of mine who's a senior lecturer at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, and that's in Amsterdam, or actually he's in The Hague, which is in the Netherlands. And we were doing this webinar about how things have changed just overnight. And one of the things I was mentioning is that robots have basically taken over slots. And what we're seeing is that people who used to work in customer service no longer have those jobs for two reasons. Number one, it's too expensive. And number two, people flat sometimes don't want to deal with another person. They prefer just to deal with the technology. And when I was in Austria a few years ago, I was actually in Vienna. There's a very large McDonald's down in the center part of the city. And kind of like what you've seen here, and maybe you've seen these type too, but when you go up, you're not going to talk to anybody to order. You're going to see this menu, you touch it. It doesn't have as many products, but it's got, oh my gosh, it's probably got at least half, if not 2/3 of the products. And you're going to order your drink and your food and your fries and whatever, and you pay, and then you take your number, like you see there, number 15, and then you turn around, and you can either put that on your table, and I think that they were thinking that, that's just to remind you, because they're not going to bring you the food. But when you turn around, you see the counter back there, and you see all these LED numbers above the counter. And when your number 15 comes up, you go up there, and it has 3 chutes. And it's interesting because the first chute, here comes your burger or your fish sandwich or whatever. Your second chute comes down your French fries. And your third chute, here comes the drink. And what's interesting about it is these things are not being put together by a person in the back. They're actually being put together by robots. And what you're seeing here is actually a picture of a robot in McDonald's that is doing all the burgers. And this is a McDonald's that's actually in Phoenix, Arizona. So what is happening is that you got these robots in the back. They're putting the burgers together, even to the point that they're being wrapped and they're going down the chutes. They're putting the fries together. As far as the drinks, it is starting where the cup drops, it goes through, it puts in the Coke or Sprite or whatever it is, it comes over, the lid is put on top, and then a straw is inserted and it goes down the chute, and there you got it. Never ever being touched by a human hand. Now, this is interesting because remember, the Bureau of Statistics said that the fast food market was going to grow so much in the next 10 years, and it completely has made reverse on that. Now the fast food market is one of the slowest growing in terms of employment, but very fast growing in terms of technology, robotics, and of course in sales too. So just a good example here, what is important for one day, the next day, that position just disappears. And one of these days, we're going to say, you remember back when you went into the McDonald's and you saw the happy face back there who's going to serve you and take your money, okay? No longer. Now you've got something else doing it for you. The next one is demotivation. It says sometimes the best solutions to morale problems is just to fire all of them, all the unhappy people. Okay, that's almost depressing to think that. But this is an age-old problem, is that with all these technological changes, sometimes you find that, the morale just starts dropping down, and before you know it, it becomes very, very negative. And I'll give you the idea kind of what happened on that. And this is the Mini Cooper plant in Oxford, England. I've been there many times taking students there to see how it works. This plant originally had about 1,500 employees working there. Now it's got about 100 employees, and it replaced all the workers who they were paying $50,000 to, because I guess it was a British union or something, being replaced with these robots that are not anywhere near that price. And the difference is that they do not gripe, they do not complain, they do not call in sick, they don't have absenteeism, they don't take vacations, they don't need fringe benefits, they don't complain when their insurance benefits are not as good as maybe someone else's. So that whole thing about, firing the people when they gripe and complain, when that demotivation, this is a good example of what's happening. And this is coming down the path to many, many places that, why put up with employees that are griping and complaining? Just replace them with robots. And those robots don't complain. Yeah, you got to fix them. And what happened there in Oxford is that they got rid of those 1,500 employees. They were not very popular. The company was not popular in Oxford, obviously. It replaced them with 100 people who actually, all they did is they repaired and tweaked the robots. And these robots last for, they say around 10 years. And they work 24/7. They don't take a break. They're not going to gripe if someone comes late from lunch, or they have to leave early for a doctor's appointment. It's kind of interesting. The next one I want to show you here is teamwork. It says ensures that all your hard work can always be ruined by someone else's incompetence. How true. And this is one I do use quite a bit, because I just try to remind everybody, being on a team and working as a cohesive team that's very functional is the most important things. When your team is dysfunctional, when you're working on a team and everybody is in disarray and unhappy with everybody, invariably you produce a very bad product. So it only takes is one person to destroy everything that team has created. And in talking about teams, how sometimes how people try to stand out, and they're kind of like, I'm the best of the best. I'm the most important person in this team. This distinction poster is great. Looking sharp is easy when you haven't done any work at all. So unfortunately, sometimes people, they seem to think that they need to kind of stand out of the crowd and look out there. There's a Japanese adage or saying that says, the nail that sticks up the highest gets hammered down the hardest. And it's very true, is that in a collective society, which we're all moving to, is that you're not trying to stand out. You're trying to be part of the team, and the whole team succeeds. And as we finish now about teamwork, This one is team building. The sometimes the most important lesson you can learn is that you're just not a very good team. And I bring this one up because once again, I'm trying to remind people is that the team is successful when everybody is successful, when everybody has the same vision and they're working together. Is when you don't work together, you have the argument that the team goes astray on things. Now, let's move this into Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. Maslow has those 5 different levels in his pyramid. And one of the points he says here is a satisfied need is not a motivator. So if you look at his pyramid here, you can see it starts at the very bottom with the physiological, followed by the safety, love, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Can't even get the word out. Maslow says these are not motivators. You cannot, now the motivators are the top ones, but you cannot motivate people until you've taken care of their basic needs, the breathing, the food, the water, sex, sleep, all these other different things. And then the safety, which means, job security, resources, family, health. Once you take care of those things, then you can motivate. But you cannot motivate people by saying, oh, by the way, we're going to pay you so that you can live. That's not a motivator at all. That's a self-need. Now, when you have a chance, I would encourage you to go to this YouTube, and does a great job of explaining the Maslow's theory to you. I'm not going to play it now because you'll get this terrible feedback where you won't be able to hear anything. But go to that YouTube and watch it, and it's going to do a great job explaining how those different 5 levels actually work. Now, moving forward, and here we go, we're going to move forward. Now, take a look and see how the general examples of Maslow's hierarchy meets to the organizational example of how it works. And what I'm trying to get across here is that it is different when you look at organizations. So, for example, those physiological needs to survive, to be able to live someplace and to pay your rent or your mortgage. In the organizational example, it says you have a base salary. So that physiological need is a base salary compared to just substance or sustaining yourself. But look at the security needs, the pension plan. Back many years ago, you didn't have pension plans, but a pension plan basically was something that was going to take care of you when you got old and you retired. Now we don't have pension plans, those defined retirement plans. You still do if you work for the government, but most companies have gone to a 401k that allows you to actually go in there and to decide where you want your money to go to. But prior to the 1930s, there wasn't any type of way that people could retire. You were dependent just upon your family. But it was FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, who came up with the idea of Social Security, that what was called a security net for people that when you got old and you retired, that the government, because the money you had paid in, was going to pay to help you to survive the remaining years of your life, which back then when it was 60 or 65, you're going to live to maybe 70 if you're lucky. Now people are living to 90 and becoming centurions in that. Next thing is, look at this. It says the belongingness of needs. Friends in work group. Now that's interesting because Maslow says you have to have that. If you don't have friends and work groups, then you cannot really survive. You cannot move up the ladder of the self-esteem and the self-actualization. But what's interesting about this is COVID did something completely different, is making people work from home. Now, a lot of people say this is the new norm. We'll never go back to work. I don't agree with that. We will go back to work in offices. And the reason why I say that is because people are social animals. We have to be around other people. You cannot live your life unless you're a hermit and you love just sitting there talking to your dog all day. You cannot live your life not being around other humans. So yes, we're going to find some companies, people will be working from home, but we'll find a lot of people going back to the office because they want to be with their fellow employees. And then, of course, the self-esteem part, which is the esteem needs, it says here job title. Believe it or not, the job title is very important. You often wonder why people have titles. It's because we need that to feel good about what we're doing. So that's why you're seeing presidents, vice president, associate vice president, assistant vice president. You may find a position may be a supervisor, or it could be something like a line technician or a optical technician, or what are these people? What is a sanitation maintenance engineer? Okay, is that someone who goes around and makes sure that the sanitation systems are working right? It sounds very impressive. We used to joke around about, we're going to make you the copy machine officer. People like to have a title because it gives them a sense of knowing that this is their job. And if you just say you're an employee, no, they want to know what type of employee I am. The last one, according to Maslow, is the self-actualization, which is the challenge. You've got to be challenged by your job. If you're not challenged by your job, you just go in there as what we call the George Jetson, where if you ever watch the cartoon George Jetson, his job was to walk in and to push a button every day for 8 hours. And he had no challenge at all. Well, if you don't have a challenging job, then you do get demotivated very quickly. Now, Hertzberg actually came up with what he called the two-factor theory, which he has the hygiene factor and the motivator factor. And you can see them in here. He says the hygiene is a salary, security, personal life, working condition, compared to the motivator factors, which is the achievement, the recognition, the growth opportunity. And when he puts those with Maslow, you can see actually what he does. There's a little overlap there in the belongingness, is that he says the bottom half of Maslow's pyramid is the hygiene factor. The top half is the motivators. Now, what he is saying, the bottom half actually does not motivate you, but if they're not fulfilled, it becomes a dissatisfactor. It literally becomes a demotivator. If those are not fulfilled, the person becomes dissatisfied with the job. And once they're dissatisfied, they will leave. It's very, very difficult to pull someone back. It's kind of like we always said, you can do 9 things right, but if you do one thing wrong, people remember the one thing you did wrong. The same thing here is that if there's one thing that goes against those factors, that it becomes a demotivator or makes the person dissatisfied, they will leave and go elsewhere. Once those are taken care of, then you have what those factors that are motivating, which is the belonging, the self-esteem, and the self-actualization. Now, followed by that, here comes McGregor with his theory of the theory of X and Y. X basically says that employees don't want to work. They try to avoid working all the time whenever possible. Managers have to control them and threaten them with punishment to achieve the organizational goals. That was McGregor's theory X. But the theory Y goes in there, says people do like to work. They want to learn. They want to accept and seek new responsibilities. Managers assume that the skills will solve any type of the work-related problems because people want to be part of a bigger entity and work. So you can see here on the right side, the X and the Y, where on the X, the management is having to manage down to the staff who do not want to be there, compared to theories Y, where the staff wants to be there, they want to grow, and management is helping them from behind. Now you sit there and say, how does that work? Well, here's a great little picture. And this picture goes back to the 1930s, where you'd work in these big factories and you sit there at the table and you get there from 8 o'clock and work till 5, and all you're doing is putting the pieces together. Now this is where McGregor got the idea. People did not like to work. There was no gratification. There was no responsibility. There was no challenges for the people. So they would come and they would leave. And if they didn't work, they didn't get paid. So they didn't want to get sick. But at the same time, is when you're not motivated, when you have no challenges, you basically have no reason to get up in bed in the morning, except for in this case, just to make the money. This then is where B.F. Skinner came into place. Because B.F. Skinner, I always like this guy's hair. It looks a little goofy, but I think he's kind of cool looking too. He came up with what's called the reinforcement theory. And it says he proposed that all behavior is a function of its consequences. Reinforcement can help in the motivation process. Now, don't get confused by thinking it's a flip that says all behavior is a function of reinforcement, which means that you behave because you're seeking out reinforcement. No, Skinner says, and that's going to be the gold theory later, Skinner says no, that your behavior is a function of the consequences. So therefore, whatever is going on around you is the way you're acting, but you can control that by different types of reinforcements. And so what he actually does, he goes in there and gives you where you have stimuli, you have a response, and then you have an outcome. And we'll give you an example of this. So therefore, let's go back to my company, the advertising company. If the client comes to me and says, I need an ad campaign, we want to launch this thing, and I tell my ad department and my account executives that you've got to come up with this campaign. I know you're going to be working later, but if it comes up with a great one and they love it, you know what? You're going to get a bonus, and we'll give everybody, 3 or 4 days off for good work. Okay, that's a positive reinforcement. But what happens when maybe they come up with they don't put the work into it and they don't really try to find out what the client wants? They come up with something and the client says, I don't like it. Okay, I send it back. Okay. Now I'm telling the people is that, you know what? Okay, we've got a problem, because now we've got to work that much harder, come up with new ideas and send it over to them, and hopefully they like those. That's the negative reinforcement, is that back to work, you're going to be working more hours trying to make sure that you get what the person wants. Now, what's interesting about that is that B.F. Skinner came in there and he said that there are 6 things that you can look at to come up with a positive outcome, the no outcome, and the negative outcome. And you can see him here. You can always come back and take a look at it later. And then here's the 4, 5, and 6, which once again are following that up with the positive outcome, the no outcome, and the negative outcome. One of the things that Skinner actually comes in there and says is that reinforcement helps people to work harder, because some people see a challenge, some people see as a goal, some people see it as that, if I do good, I'm going to get positive feedback, positive outcomes compared to getting a negative outcome. And there's various theories who came out there and said the way that you make sure the reinforcement works is for that team to become empowered to go out and figure out what do we need to do to get that reinforcement. So for example, here you got your art team who's trying to come up with the ideas, and let's say you've got 2 art teams, each one working with, let's say one's working with Geico and one's working with Progressive. Progressive does, what's her name? Flow, those type of commercial. Geico's over there doing their type of commercial, which I think they were doing the Caveman and the Gecko and all that. Okay, so here you've got 2 teams. So one team is sent there, okay, we're going to create this with Flow and all these different things here. But the team that's working with the Geico, they actually go to Geico and they said, okay, what did you like? Did you like the Gecko? Did you like the Caveman that we did many, many, many years ago? Tell us what you like. Tell us what you've seen that you really like. Now, so the Geico team says, you know what, this is kind of interesting. We think Flow's doing good, but we also see that State Farm, Jake at State Farm. So here you've got the situation where Team A actually goes out there and gets information from the client so that they're able to build something so they're that closer to the reinforcement and to the goal, to the rewards. Team B, who doesn't get any information, they just depend upon what they think is right, and they come up with it and they put it out to a Progressive. Hopefully the Progressive says, great, we like it, or no, we don't like it. So this was not B.F. Skinner, but this was other theorists who said that reinforcement is even stronger when you are able to go out there and get the information ahead of time that empowers the people to change their behavior based upon the consequences of what they're being told. And then they're able to dictate if it's going to be more of a positive reinforcement or a negative reinforcement. And that, of course, creates the positive outcome or the negative outcome. Pretty interesting about that. So basically the theory of reinforcements, I'm not going to go through all this, but you got the positive reinforcement, you got the extinction, and then the last one you got is the punishment phase. And that punishment phase is, of course, where, okay, go back to the drawing board, you people with Progressive. You missed it completely. You came up with the wrong idea. The punishment is go back and work again. You're going to be working longer hours. The people who are working on Geico, they actually checked into it ahead of time. They figured it out. They were empowered to get the information. So punishment can be pushed to the side if you actually allow your people to go out there and get more information ahead of time. And the schedules of the reinforcements is partial and then there's interval, and then there's ratio. So these are all different, what we call the schedules of reinforcements. You can read about it. Next thing I want to talk briefly about is just what is behavior modification, which basically says that it's a combination of positive reinforcement that is either punishment or extinction so that the undesired behavior disappears and is replaced by desired behavior. So this whole idea of behavior modification is that group that's working to get the marketing plan for Geico, and they're going out and they're looking for the positive reinforcement by saying, how do we avoid the punishment or the extinction so that we change our behavior so we get what we do want, which is going to be the positive reinforcement. Then finishing up here, equity theory. Equity theory is interesting because equity theory says that the amount of input you put into the work can quite often affect upon the outcome that you put in that comes out of the setting or out of the work. So basically what it says is that the input and the outcomes are very much related to each other. And I'm not going to go through all the details, but here is kind of like the formula of the inequity, the change inputs, the change outcomes, how you alter perceptions of yourself and others, and then it talks about the equity. I will slip right now into the goal theory because this is actually a pretty good one that you may find interesting, because goal theory suggests that people who have a goal will work harder than people without a goal, and that not all goals are, of course, created equal, and goals are difficult, specific, and they're concrete, are the ones that motivate people the best. So just if you go in there and say the goal is that if you do a good job with your task, I'm going to reward you. Okay, they're saying that's not a specific goal that's going to motivate people. What is specific is that if you are, let's say you're printing a koozie, you know what a koozie is, that's the can holder. If you're going to put an imprint on a koozie, if you print 1,000 of those koozies in an hour, then you are going to actually be able to take the day off tomorrow because you're getting more work done today because you're working harder. So therefore, the goal is to do that so you get the better reward off of it. So let's talk about koozies for a second. You know what a koozie, like I said, is that can holder. I just gave you the example about the imprinting of the koozie. Now here's a case. This is the koozie that, let's say, the University Co-op was ordering just to sell. So they're taking this burnt orange and they're going to print it with the Texas and the Longhorn. And here's actually a picture of how they do imprint the koozie. And this is kind of the old way they used to do it. Now I know this because the marketing part of my company, we have the ad side and then we have the marketing promotional product side, sells koozies, not to UT, but actually we sell these koozies. And so the koozies are pre-made, and then they're actually put on this sleeve here, and they go over there, and there is a screen, and that screen is the image you're going to imprint. Let's say it's the Longhorn and the word Texas. And the area that actually is imprinted, there's holes in the screen that when the ink is ran across it with a squeegee or whatever, the ink drops down and it puts the imprint onto that koozie, which is a porous surface. Porous means that it will absorb liquids. So that's how you see the Longhorn, and that's how you see the word Texas, like you see in this image right here. So this is a handmade process, and the items that do not have the holes in the screen that are solid, the ink just goes right across, and that's how you get that imprint. Now that's the way they used to do it. It's a little different now because it's more automated, but I'm going to give you the story. And the story is that it used to be that the people who own, where's my picture here? There's my picture. I was wondering where that picture is. And this is the automated process here. So the people who had the koozie company, they're actually based in San Antonio. And what they had is they had this equipment, not this here. And I'm going to go back to the equipment here that shows you where you would have the individual putting the koozie on the sleeve and it would go through in the imprint. How many do you think they could print in an hour? But believe it or not, they could print up to 10,000 of these an hour. But they were paying by piecemeal. Now, piecemeal means they're going to pay by the number that is actually being produced. So at 5 cents each is what they're paying, and they were paying that to produce those koozies. that person was making $500 an hour. That's pretty awesome to produce 10,000 koozies. Of course, if they messed up a koozie, they had to pay back to the company 25 cents an hour, or 25 cents per koozie. So therefore, you could print 4 koozies right and print 1 wrong, end up losing money off of it. You sit there and say, how in the world could they do 10,000 koozies an hour? Well, actually they could, because all they were doing is slipping it on there and spinning it, slipping and spinning and slipping and spinning. And the problem is that you could not work for 8 hours a day doing that. Matter of fact, a lot of them could just barely work 4 hours a day. So the company was sitting there with these machines that were working about 4 hours. What do you do for the other 20 hours of the day? Well, they're very smart, because this is the piecemeal again. You're paying by piecemeal, not by hour. So what they told the person who's working the machine is that, you know what, you've got the machine for 24 hours. Now, you cannot work more than 8 hours. That goes against all the labor codes. But if you want to get other people in there to work, that's fine, just as long as the quality stays there. So people were getting their family members or getting their friends, and they were going there working, 4-hour shifts. Matter of fact, sometimes they could only work maybe 2-hour shifts of doing it so fast. So let's say they're working 4-hour shifts. You had 6 people coming working that machine every day. And that machine would work 5, maybe 6 days, but I think only 5 days. And think about that. If you were working and doing 10,000 koozies, you're making $500 an hour, and you could do that for 24 hours straight, which you couldn't do quite 24 hours straight, but 20 hours straight. Making $10,000 a day, right? Does that come out right? Yeah, it actually does. So these machines were very, very profitable because they were working on the piecemeal. Now, the koozie company decided, you know what? We can save some money in shipping if we also have an operation up in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. But when they got up there, the labor unions were a little bit different. They did not let people work on the piece rate, but they paid you by the hour. So they were paying these people $50 an hour. And here you got the situation where the koozie company, now they were having to pay a flat rate. And it didn't matter how many koozies are being produced. It didn't matter if they're producing 10,000 koozies or 500 koozies. They're still getting paid the same dollar amount per hour. So they saw the volume of the koozies dropping down because there was not the piece rate in there. Well, this is a good example of what we call the goal theory, because the goal here is pull everything out of the way and tell me what I need to do, and I'll go for it. The San Antonio office says, the machine is yours. Run it 24 hours a day, run it as much as you need, but we need 1 or 2 days a week that we're going to go in there and repair it, make sure it's working right. And during that time, you work as far as you want to, as hard as you want to, as fast as you want to. You can have many people coming in here as long as, they all check out, of course, and produce those koozies. So, and like I said, here's the case now. If you want to go and watch this video, this is actually on YouTube. And what this is the way it's done now, where all they're doing is slipping the koozies onto those white rollers. It's going up there, and that green bar across the top is where the imprinting. And then the koozie comes down to the bottom and it drops off, and then it's packaged. So kind of an interesting concept about the goal theory. Okay, well, let's see what happened there. There we go. And there we got our different koozies. You can see that, they can get very creative. And actually nowadays they can print multicolors, which just means it goes through there more than one time. And to finish up here, let's talk just real briefly about the intrinsic motivation, which means the motivation to do the work because it is interesting, engaging, and challenging. I'm not going to say that printing koozies is interesting, engaging, and challenging. I'm saying printing koozies can make you a lot of money if you're willing to go through it, but that's why they typically work 2 or 3 to 4 hours. But let's talk more about maybe you working on a budget if you're in finance or accounting, or maybe you're working on an advertising campaign, you're in marketing. Okay, that could be interesting, could be engaging and challenging. So that's intrinsic motivation, where the extrinsic motivation means that you're getting paid an hourly fee, or maybe you're just getting paid that piecemeal fee on things. So finishing up here with motivation. Motivation is the capacity to grow in the organization, is to earn more, is recognition for your work, family acceptance. Believe it or not, A motivator is very, very high in family acceptance and social pride in the job. Nobody just wants to be told that, well, what do you do? Oh, I print koozies. No, what they want to do is say, I print 10,000 koozies an hour or whatever. I'm still trying to figure out how they do that many koozies, but believe it or not, that's what I've heard and that's what I've been told. So it's also that feeling of being respected. And what are the disappointments? Low job challenge, no progression in employment, unrealistic expectations, conflict, uncertainty, all the way down to feeling unfairly treated. So when you look at motivation, and this is how we're going to finish motivation, is that you've got ways that you motivate people and you get good morale, you get people excited about their job, their attitude is positive. But if you cannot motivate people, the morale drops and you see increase in absenteeism, you see employee turnover and falling productivity. And of course, you see grievances in those employees. And when that happens, you know what happens? If the employer can actually replace the employees, remember that thing, fire them and all that, actually, it could happen. If you see this poor morale, they replace them. And who did they replace them with? They replace them with robotics, Now, just for a few minutes, and we're going to whip through talking about recruiting and training and developing employees. And I'm going to kind of go through here kind of fast. There was a little story there. I'm not going to tell you the story, but I'm going to tell you about recruiting, that there are different ways to recruit good employees. The first one is through internal recruiting, and the second one is external recruiting. Internal means you're looking on the inside. External means you're looking on the outside of your company. Now, what are some of the advantages of internal? Is that increases motivation. People look at it and they're saying that, when you are have the ability to move up in the company, that's an advantage. It also, people already have got the knowledge and they know the culture. So therefore, an advantage is you don't have to retrain people on that. But the disadvantage is that it fosters stagnation and also what we call the ripple effect. Another word for the ripple effect, it used to be called, now it's called a bounded awareness. It used to be called inbreeding. We don't like to use that word anymore, inbreeding, but actually what it meant is that people were doing the same thing. They were learning from other people. They were not bringing any new ideas in. So once again, here you're a graduate, you come out, you got new ideas, but if the company is just hiring within all the time, they're never bringing any new ideas in. External recruiting, the advantage is there, it does bring in the new ideas and avoids that ripple effect. But what are the disadvantages? The disadvantages are that it hurts motivation. People feel like, well, why didn't you look at me? Because I've been here 5 or 10 years. And of course, it does cost more too to look on the outside. Now, a couple things to know about this is that the research tells us there is absolutely no difference between internal and external recruiting. They both got the pros, they both have got the cons. So there's no big difference that one is better than the other. But something it does also tell us is that in terms of motivation, that if you give someone a pay increase or you do a job transfer or promotion, usually that motivation only lasts for 16 days. Think about that, folks. For 16 days, that person is motivated. On the 17th day, on the average, the person goes back to what they were. If they were unhappy, they go back to being happy. If they were just working along, doing their job, not motivated, they go back to that. So it used to be we would give people a pay increase once a year and say, this is your pay increase for the year. People be happy. But nowadays, what we understand is that people are not happy. After 16 days, they go back to being the way they were. So if you were to recruit internally and move someone up, thinking, okay, this is to make a great person into even a better person, it really doesn't. It's going to go right back to the way they were. And then let's talk about the internal recruitment process, the pros and cons. We've talked about this. But one of the things I want to tell you, of course, that word inbreeding, which we now call it bounded awareness, which is actually a better way to look at it, because you are bounded by just the knowledge that you've had before in the company. But one of the things that I want to point out here is it causes infighting. And infighting is you may have one slot and you've got 2 or 3 people who want to apply for it, and they start fighting. Maybe they're great friends, but all of a sudden they start fighting because they all want that slot. So you give it to one person. What does the other person or the second person do? Well, unfortunately, they may get mad and quit, and you've lost a good employee. Now, even if that person you chose to be promoted up or to go to that other position, people may start accusing that person of getting favoritism. So I've seen times before where you have one position, you got two people want the position, you promote one of them into it, the one that didn't get promoted, they get negative and they end up leaving, and the one you promoted, they start feeling like that maybe they were given preferential treatment, or flat, they're just tired of people talking about them. Friends of the person who left. So therefore, and you end up losing that person too. So I've seen it where two people apply for a job, one gets it, and they both end up quitting off of it. External recruitment, a little hard to see here, but the best way is word of mouth by advertising, the college placement office, electronic recruiting, employment agencies, not so much on employment agencies, but we do see a lot of the electronic recruiting. Now, the other way is internships, which is a mixed model. And then you have management training programs. But let me kind of explain to you a little bit about management training programs. This was something that was created some years back where you hire somebody, and then what you do is, let's say you're a fresh graduate, we hire you, and we're saying for the next 2 years, every quarter, we're going to put you in a different part of the company so you can see how the company operates. And you're going to work in that area. And then at the end of 2 years, you're going to help us decide where's the best place to put you. Okay, that sounds great, doesn't it? Sounds like you're going to see the whole company. A couple of problems here. Number one, you know what they're doing? They're trying to see where you work the best. So after you go through that rotation of each one of those divisions, they're asking the hiring manager in that area, what do you think about George? George is my favorite name, by the way. What do you think about George here? George is good, but, I don't think he's going to work good in here. Yeah, George is great. Yeah, I guess. But let's see who else. You literally go through 2 years. You may even not make it through 2 years before they let you go. No one really thinks they like you that much. So it's kind of like you're on probation, not for 90 days, but for 2 years. Now, my youngest son, who works for companies, very large companies, has told me that the problem is when you have this person going through this rotation. Think about this. Every 90 days, you're working with a new manager, a new group of employees. And not only are they, here comes another new graduate, here comes another person through the rotation. You as the rotation person, you're getting tired because it just wears you out. You're not part of the same group. Remember Maslow's hierarchy? That belongingness, that you belong to a team. Well, guess what? That team's going to change every 90 days on you. And that's tough. And it's very hard to get to your self-esteem, your self-actualization when your team is changing every 90 days. So that's the downside to management training programs, is that there's not a lot of stability into it, and it causes people flat to get worn out about it. Now, back in the old days, and I'm going to show you just a few little ads here as we finish up, but back in the old days, you can actually post things externally, like you put them in the magazine. So what magazine did you post in? You probably were going to post in something that was related to your industry. So, for example, if you're looking for someone who was maybe going to work in the cosmetics department of your retail outlet, you may put the ads in, Cosmopolitan or Life magazine. Matter of fact, here's an ad that goes back, this is United Airlines, goes back to the 50s. Of course, you can't say any of this anymore. Qualifications, age 21 to 27, height 5'2" to 5'7", unmarried, weight never over 135 pounds, 20 to 30 vision without glasses, I love this part, must be a registered nurse or have 2 years of college, or 1 year of college and 1 year of business, or 3 years of business in lieu of the college requirement. Okay, very, very tight stipulations in there. But where was this ad found? Well, back then you would find this in, let's say, the Cosmopolitan magazine. Would you find it in Reader's Digest or Good Housekeeping? No, because first of all, what's that thing? Unmarried, okay. Right off the bat, they're sitting there saying, this is what we want. Of course, you cannot do this nowadays, and it's a good reason why you cannot do it, because you're actually discriminating against certain people. But nowadays, things are not placed in magazines, in the trade magazines. They're actually more done through the electronics, and probably the biggest one is Indeed. You got Google, you got Glassdoor, you got Monster, all these different ones out there. And you put the ads, and just remember is that when an ad's placed in here and you apply to it, you're probably 4,000 people applying to the job. So that's a little bit of a problem because the algorithms in there are trying to look for ways to knock you out, narrow it down to the very few people. I always use the example of both of my sons. They were not above a 3.0. Matter of fact, one had 2.89, the other one had like a 2.75. My youngest one went to Syracuse, very, very tough program he was in there. Kind of played off a little bit, that's okay. But when it came time to apply for jobs, he kept getting kicked out. He had all the qualifications, but when he asked for his GPA, he was putting out 2.89 or 2.9, and he was kicking him out because the algorithm said that you had to have a 3.0. So therefore, he got kicked out even though he was very highly qualified for the position. And this is something I like to tell people is that when you had the paper applications and you wouldn't actually sit in front of people, they could see who you were. Now you've got a computer who's on decide who's on go to the finalists and who's not. Well, my son one time said, well, Dad, if I put a 3.0, I'll probably have all these job interviews. I said, but you can't do that because that's literally lying on your application. But I tell you what he did do, which I always tell people they should do. He decided, he did get a job, by the way. He went to work and very, very good job. But he decided that to go for the next job in the next few years, that he needed to take care of that GPA. So he applied to graduate school, went to University of Colorado, got a degree. His master's is in data business analytics. Amazing to me because I'm not an analytical person. But the first course he took, he made an A in. In the second course, he made an A in. So what was his GPA in his graduate work? 4.0. And I can't give him all the credit. I'm going to take a little credit myself because I told him, I said, son, take the two easiest courses you can start off with. And the easiest ones were, I think it was like basic statistics. And for him, it's very easy. So he made A's in those courses. His GPA is 4.0. So now when they ask you what your GPA is, you always look at your most recent education. In his case, that most recent education was that master's in business and data analytics, and he put down 4.0. Now, he did actually graduate with he graduated like a 3.5 with the master's in business analytics. I tell people all the time is that, if you have a lousy GPA or if it's not high enough, maybe once you get your first job, go in there and start working on a graduate degree, because once you get one course under your belt with one grade, that becomes your new GPA, and you can start using that. Even to the point that if you don't finish your master's degree, you can always say that you had this work in progress and your GPA was 4.0, 3.7, or whatever it is. Paper applications been around for a long time. Here's one that I always like to bring up. Back in the 1960s, can't do paper applications anywhere like this. They're very standardized. Typically, they're all done electronically, but look at this. Back what Disney could do. Look at the top right-hand corner. You can ask male, female the coat size, waist size, shoe size, hat size. Interesting. You can go in there and look at on the left-hand side, physical height, weight. Oh my goodness, your hair color. Do you wear glasses? How long has it been since you had your eyes checked? This is wild, but this is the way the paper applications used to be. And then you go in there and look at your birth record, your father, your mother. They want to know all this type of good stuff. Then they want to know about your home life. Do you own a house? Or are you renting? Do you live with your parents? Oh my gosh, can you imagine if you filled all this out, the stuff you know about people? Of course, you cannot fill this part out anymore because, it does discriminate. But it's just kind of interesting. We go back and look at the way it used to be done many years ago. And then, of course, over here, you list all of your employers and all the places you've lived ever and ever and ever. Well, back in the day, those paper applications gave so much information. Matter of fact, when I first came out of college, and this goes back to the late 1970s, 1979, I remember getting an application. On the application, it said, if you're married or not, and if you're a female, were you pregnant or not? You can actually ask that. Well, back then, actually, you could ask that because they would sit there and say that, if you're pregnant, it could affect our health insurance premiums. It also can affect whether or not that you're going to come back to work. We don't want to hire you for 6 weeks just because you're going to have a baby. That's why it used to be. Can't do that anymore. So what are the selection criterias? You look quite often at the education, the experience, the skills, and the abilities, but not necessarily in that order. So this is where you actually find, depending upon where you are, someone who has just recently graduated, they're going to be looking heavily at your education. Someone who's been in the working world for a while, they're going to look more at your experience. So this is how you probably learn in your resume. You're going to set up in different ways. And the last slide is the mode of selection, interview, testing, aptitude testing, in-tray exercise. You can read about that. It's kind of interesting. And then, of course, a presentation. That's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this, talking about motivation and a little bit about how we recruit people. Of course, if you have any questions, always feel free to email me. We'll talk to you again soon.